Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming out. It is my great pleasure to welcome Prasad Kaipa to Authors at Google. He's here today to talk about his book, From Smart to Wise, and it's actually a great honor to have him. Dr. Kaipa is an executive coach, mentor, author, and founder of the Center for Leadership, Innovation, and Change at the Indian School of Business. He is also Silicon Valley long-time part of Silicon Valley. He has presented, he has led executive development, career coaching, everything at multiple different companies here at Silicon Valley. And it's my honor to welcome him to Google today. So if we could please, I'll give him a big round of applause.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good afternoon. What I thought today we'll talk about is to look at why the smartness is the baseline now. It is no longer something that gives us the privilege. When I was growing up in India, when I went to IIT, that was something very, very special. Or when I worked for an Apple computer in 80s, that was something very special. But coming and giving a talk at Google, everybody is very special, otherwise they wouldn't be here. So from that aspect, it's like a baseline. If the smartness is the new baseline at Google or many of the Silicon Valley companies at this moment, how would you stay one step ahead? How do you demonstrate personal leadership? That is the theme which I will address a lot more. So next step I thought I should look at is how many of you think you are smart? Other people may feel that you are smart, you are not, but from your own perspective, would you raise your hands if you think you are smart? It's an interesting scenario because depending on different cultural context and norms, everybody has their own expectations and standards of whether they raise their hands or not. Can you keep it up for 1 minute? Okay, great. So some of you didn't raise the hands. I wouldn't exactly ask at this moment why, but let me get to the next part. Can you raise your hand if you think you are wise? Sometimes counts. Yeah, could be, sometimes counts. Interesting. So definitely smaller number of hands than smartness, number one. Number two, they went up slowly. Maybe we associate smartness with speed and wisdom with slowness. That's different matter which we'll talk a little bit more about. I was curious about that. Next thing, have you read the book From Smart to Wise which I have written? Any of you? Have you done, there is a baseline assessment which we came up with, which is a 5-minute assessment on FromSmartToWise.com. If you go, there are 18 questions. Because you have not read the book, of course, there is also a link to that Q-link to assessment. You can go there. I recommend before you start the book, if you can actually do the assessment, then read the book and start applying it. That way, actually the value of what you read will become a lot more applicable and a lot more grounded in what you want to do. So let me start with a definition. Because the smartness is the new currency in the knowledge age, how do you really define it? We defined in the book smartness as the application of intelligence for self-interest. So practical smartness is about using your knowledge to get ahead, using your knowledge to become a leader when other people are not having the same opportunity, or to make money, to get a job, to move ahead. Different ways, it's all connected with how do you make sure your smartness pays off for your own growth and development. That's traditional, simpler way to define it. But of course, smartness is not just about people. It is actually something that is pervading our culture. For example, this IBM has been calling this decade as the decade of smartness. They are trying to create what you might call a smarter planet. And how do we really begin to use our smartness for the larger context of environment, population, technology to work for everybody. And of course, I don't have to talk at Google about the smartphones. If you notice, I put the iPhone all the way in the back. The other thing is the smart televisions. It is not just the smart television that is becoming popular. You are also talking about smart meters of different kind. In California, P&G, actually it is PG&E, introduced smart meters and of course Nest, smart temperature control, not just one unit, one appliance. Now everybody talks about an entire house, and entire community is becoming smarter. Because of this pervasiveness of smartness as the new currency, I wonder whether the smartness is a new definition for dumbness. Because if you try to really look at everybody being smart, you have to focus on something other than smartness if you need to get ahead. So in that context, sometimes holding back on self-interest, holding back on being too smart actually could be wise. At some level, reflecting, introspecting, slowing down to make sure that you have actually paid attention to the context around you and taking care of people on your team, taking care of your organization, not just your self-interest, could be considered not just smart but also wise. In fact, when I used to work with several entrepreneurs and the venture capital firms in the Valley, they talk generally about if an idea has a 70% chance of success, to make it as an entrepreneurial success, they say don't do it. Why? Everybody in the Valley would be focusing on something that has a 70% chance of success. So that means on the ground, your entrepreneurial company based on that idea may not actually fly. If you reverse it, if an idea has only 30% of chance of success, but if you can really put attention to it, because not many other entrepreneurs are also interested in that idea, you have a 70% of chance of success for making the company successful. So what I am trying to raise is, it is counterintuitive for people to be successful in the age of knowledge. You have to think outside the box of what is in it for me. How can I be successful in the short term? You may have to expand your circle of not only influence, your circle of interest to include your team, your organization, sometimes your community, and bring in the context of noble purpose if you want to be successful with your smartness. Interestingly, somebody says, of course, William Shakespeare puts it quite nicely, a fool thinks of himself to be wise, a wise man always knows himself to be a fool first. So at some level, we are trying to say smartness doesn't cut it to be successful, let alone in Silicon Valley, because of complexity that we live in, the ambiguity enormous. Nobody can tell you exactly what to do, how to do it. And especially when Larry comes up and says we need to have it as a 10x, you need to do 10x thinking in Google, it is no longer sufficient for you to look at how do I make incremental improvement. If I need to create a breakthrough innovation, and if my products and services are always online, even a few minutes of going out could have a significant headlines saying that Google is out for a few minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes. In that type of a context, you have to figure out a way to see how to be wise. But becoming wise has got a lot of connotations. In the earlier stage, when my co-author Navi and myself, when we started writing a book, one gentleman whom we were interviewing, he asked us, do you think you are wise enough to write the book? If not, why are you writing it? If you are not wise, what gives you the authority to talk about wisdom? That's a very legitimate question, because everybody in different cultures have their own opinions about what it means to be wise. Of course, I thought I'll give some practical examples collaborating with the myths that we have. People say, once you are wise, you stay wise. This gentleman was head of IMF. He was pretty much a shoo-in for the presidents of France till he couldn't keep his clothes on. You know, sometimes nobody talks about how to use your wisdom or smartness, but unfortunately, latest what you call records say that he is being charged with all kinds of charges which are so demeaning to what could have been a IMF president or a president of France. So once you are wise, you cannot stay wise. This is a grounded, pragmatic, action-oriented scenario where every day you need to take some steps to ask yourself, this is a smart approach, this is a wise approach. Can I make a wiser decision today for this? Can I take a wiser action today? That's the only way you can continue to keep updating on your wisdom. The second myth says age and maturity make people wise. General Patraeus was celebrated general in Afghanistan. He was the director of CIA. But I wonder what happens when it comes to thinking when you are doing the largest spy organization in the world, but you think some of the stuff which you do can stay private. Sometimes I just don't know. And of course we have the latest hero. He thinks about what it is, and there was a nice comic about a couple of weeks ago. So if you think that the only chosen few have access to wisdom, we'll have to question what kind of a wisdom is that. So I wonder whether the wisdom is actually our birthright when we are young. If you have children, you do know some of the common sense questions that the children raise, some of the kind of comments they make, some of the honesty and authenticity children have. I wonder whether we beat it out of their system in the name of socializing, in the name of politeness, in the name of what you call emotional intelligence, in the name of everything else. I wonder we try to focus them more on trying to be smart according to old standards, but let go of the common sense wisdom that would give them a larger perspective, little bit more broader way of looking at the world. Now let me get it closer to the home. If you take some of these people, many people I asked when I gave talks around the world, would you call them smart? Lots of hands went up. Would you call them wise? Not many hands went up. Why is that? Do we associate wisdom with age? Do we assume that only old people with a lot of gray hair have to be wise, but if you are young, you cannot be wise? Interestingly, we talked to one of the analysts who used to work with this gentleman, Mark Zuckerberg, in the early stage. She said when he came to her research firm talking about social network, she was not at all convinced about his smartness, let alone his wisdom. But a year and a half later, when he came back, she almost thought it was a completely different person. She began to realize within the year time period, he had associated himself with a lot of good advisors, wise leaders, and he learned. And because of his learning, he was able to transform himself, which is what your founders seems to have done. They started it, brought somebody else in, and then when the time is ripe and when they felt they were mature enough, Larry took the CEO role again. So there is a role in which where there is humility, willingness to say I need to learn from others, and willingness to say this may not be the right thing. Those are some characteristics. It doesn't matter whether you are young or old, that can come in. And finally, if you look at some of these people, I don't think there will be much of disagreement if we talk about their wisdom. Only thing you might want to think about is, did they give up their smartness to be wise? Interestingly, when Navi and I were looking at the title for this book, we wanted to call it Smart and Wise. That is when the editor taught us, you guys are writing the book, but you haven't figured out how to come up with a wise title. We said, why? He said, if you call Smart and Wise, where is the hook in the book? Why would anybody buy it? You need to have a title by creating a journey or a pathway from smart to wise, so that people get some doubt, maybe their smartness is not good enough, they will buy it. So they said, if you first, it is good to talk about wisdom, but you have to be smart and in the beginning to come up with the right title. So we are learning that some of these are extremely important. But of course, finally, it is also important to recognize wisdom is not about coming up with answers, but it is about asking the right questions. Considering the kind of work that you do, whether it is YouTube, whether it is Google, whether it is many of the other things, your innovation, especially a breakthrough innovation, will come not by incrementally tinkering what you already have, but to be able to ask difficult questions, recognize your products are online all the time, and if you have to make changes, sometimes you may have to fail bigger before you can succeed even bigger. When you don't have the courage, when you don't have the wherewithal, and when you don't go for the 10x as you are talking about, the ability to stay afloat, let alone ability to grow and become bigger and bigger, is going to be questionable. But of course, we can talk from a Google perspective, but the key it comes down to is, Google is nothing but all of you and a few more out there. That means each one of us have to take responsibility for what I'm doing, how will it make a difference to my team, my division, my company. If I can have that larger perspective, when what you do becomes successful, you also become successful with it. In the book, I call it enlightened self-interest. That means if you want to be a personal leader, if you want to be extraordinary and be recognized for what you do, you may have to think about how to expand that pie. You know, like again, being in Silicon Valley, we use another metaphor, right? I'm sure you are all familiar with. Many times when smart people get together to create an entrepreneurial company, they talk about what is your share, what is my share, what is the investor share, and all of them. One gentleman taught me, he said, when you are coaching these people, you need to help them to see, even if you have 70% of a grape, 70% share of a small company, doesn't mean very much. Your job as entrepreneurial team is to make that grape into a watermelon. When you make the grape into orange or a watermelon, even a 5% stake in that watermelon is going to be many, many, many times larger than the grape. So that means being smart is looking at what share do I have, how much stock do I have. Being wise means how can each of us work together to make whatever we have into much bigger. It shifts the perspective significantly. But that doesn't always come through properly. Let me give an example of Microsoft, for example. When in 1999, the Department of Justice wanted to break up Microsoft, and Bill Gates' testimony didn't go very well and got a bad rep for the Microsoft, Bill Gates stepped down. He wanted to go ahead and create the Gates Foundation. Of course, since then he has given away $26 billion and went ahead and started doing something, and now he has become from a smart Bill Gates, he has become a wise Bill Gates. But on the other hand, he left the Microsoft to the smart bomber just to give some of his wise quotes. You might have heard of some of these. There is no chance that the iPhone is going to get any significant market share. No chance. You can see this on a YouTube, by the way. Linux is a cancer that attaches itself to, in an intellectual property sense, to everything it touches. And this is the classic. Google is not a real company, it's a house of cards. Yeah, very interesting. And of course, Bill Gates himself wrote a book on future of technology called Road Ahead. It didn't have any mention of internet, by the way. So sometimes I wonder there are more limits to smartness than we pay attention to. The key to remember about smartness is today you may be the smartest person in the room, but tomorrow there are no guarantees. Somebody else will come and take your position. So it's a moving target. You can't actually try to outsmart people on a constant basis. It's exhausting and it is not worth it. Second, smartness is always about either a vision of the future or what you have done in the past. Not worth it because it doesn't give you the mindfulness or never in the present moment. Third, what is smart from one perspective may be foolish from another, and it doesn't translate very well from one culture to another. You may have to really begin to think about maybe smartness is not the only way to be successful, and recognize that the knowing and seeing the patterns ahead of everybody else is a trap, because it leads to ultimately self-denial, because I came up with a phrase called core incompetence. Your signature strength of yesterday that got you to this job today is a nail in your foot and prevents you from going somewhere else. So where is your foot nailed to the floor is in your smartness. So watch out and make sure smartness is not an addiction that you keep feeding, because unless you recontextualize it as wisdom, your personal leadership does not get recognized as much as you want it to be recognized. So what is this wise leadership? How do you really recontextualize smartness into wisdom? I believe the smartness is like a pendulum. It swings to two extremes. One extreme, if it swings, I call it a business smartness, like an entrepreneurial smartness. The other extreme, if it swings, I call it a functional smartness. That means I want to be the head of my stuff, I want to be the chief technologist, I want to be the CTO. It is, and even Nobel laureates. I had a good fortune to interview several Nobel laureates over a period of time. I found out even they get stuck in one end of the spectrum or other end of the spectrum. The wise leadership is anchoring the wisdom to a larger purpose. When you anchor your smartness with something larger as wisdom, then you can swing from one end to other end without the loss of face, because you are no longer committed to the questions or becoming an expert in the room, but you are willing to look stupid. You are willing to ask dumb questions. You are willing to ask some things which other people are not raising, like emperor has no clothes. Because of that, you may be able to find something very interesting. Arno Penzias, one of the Nobel laureates, talks about how he actually ended up getting a Nobel Prize. He said once he was driving from New Jersey to Midwest with his wife and a 9-year-old daughter, and who was telling, it seems, him, why is that when you change from one radio station to another radio station, you have this buzz? How can you not prevent this buzz? You are a physicist, what can you do? And where is this coming from? He said, oh, this is an electronic noise. But later he realized he really doesn't know where the noise is coming when you are going from one station to another, and he spent some time. He realized it is an intergalactic cosmic noise which got him a Nobel Prize for that. So sometimes it is extremely important that smartness gets us focused on knowledge and what we know. But if you want to do 10x contribution to you or to your company, you may have to ask more questions, and more questions for which you have no clue how to answer. Then the ambiguity you have, the stress that you are dealing with, and the complexity of work that we deal with, that can be leveraged to gain more wisdom instead of proving yourself to be more smart. So let me summarize a couple of things and I'll give a few examples. Ultimately, leadership, whether you manage other people or not, to be a leader, to be a personal leader, it all comes down to three things. How do you make decisions? Do you use judgment and discernment in making decisions? Second, how do you take actions? Are those actions towards your own benefit or with a enlightened self-interest that benefits your team or your family or your organization? Third, how do you communicate? Do you communicate saying, what I talk, I take responsibility, what you listen, I have no responsibility? That's one way to communicate. Another one is to look at and say, what I communicate is based on what you have received. It doesn't mean I have to talk a lot, but maybe much of what I have to do in communication may be listening, maybe asking questions, reading your body language, using a lot more emotional intelligence, context sensitivity. All of these become extremely important. Especially when we are smart, it becomes a lot harder to do this. So, wise leadership, we define it as same intelligence application, but this time we ask you to do two things. One is reflection on the context around you. Second, introspection on the skills that you bring. If you can couple reflection and introspection and focus on the larger good, that larger good extends as far as you want it to be. For Steve Jobs, larger good extended only up to he and his company. But for you, you need to make a choice how much good is larger good for you. In other words, it is repurposing your intelligence and smart leadership in the present moment. It is about being mindful, not just about the past or the future, but it is about being here and now at some level. What does wise leadership get you? It gets you ethical clarity in times of complexity. Second, judgment in when you need discernment. And finally, humility, recognizing I might have come up with a great solution today, but it has happened because of help of other people. And when you honor other people, when you respect other people who help you, chances are that can become a sustainable relationship. So let me just give a quote and ask whether you have any questions, and I can give examples of wise leadership and I can do a lot of different things, but for you to become wise, there are three most important stuff. As I said, reflection is a very powerful tool. Second, we call it politically correct word, best practices. We try to look at the best practices. In my book, we wrote a lot of examples based on interviews and narratives of various successful leaders, which is the easiest. Third, experience. What I recommend is, once you complete this talk, actually think about, when you go back, three areas. What do I need to communicate in my project? What decisions do I need to make to take the next step? What actions are imperative for me? In those three scenarios, if you can think every day, at least one decision, one action, and one communication. Is this a smart one or a wise one? Can I begin to take one decision a day that is wiser? One action a day that would move me towards wise leadership? I have a feeling over a period of time, as somebody said, can I be wiser? Sometimes I think you raise the question. I think that is the way in which we go. Even though wisdom may be the birthright, because we have forgotten and got conditioned, we may have to unlearn and selectively forget what we have picked up, how to be smart, and step by step we can make progress towards wise leadership. Let me stop for a minute and check any questions, comments. Yeah, please. You have a question in the back. There is a microphone coming. Arthur.
You're not speaking about being genuine, and I know it's embedded in those concepts, but that is one particular concept I think first and foremost needs to be spoken to, and obviously maybe in your book, but.
I use the word authenticity. For example, Steve Jobs was very authentic, but he was not necessarily mostly appropriate. I think there is a movie that came out last weekend. I just saw it. It was so flat for me because I worked for Apple and I had known Steve Jobs, at different times. So for me it was like, duh, there wasn't anything that got into what made somebody, special that didn't come through. So all the key points, all the checklist has been done, but there is no learning that can come. There is no insight into it. On the other hand, Tim Cook is very appropriate. He didn't care about when he was number 2, Chinese workers, all of them, but as soon as he became CEO, he started paying more attention to. But at the same time, he is very politically sensitive, politically correct, wonderful, but now some people are raising questions. Is he the right person? Is he leading Apple in the right way? So you may need to think about when is it appropriate for you to be genuine and authentic and say what you have in your mind with your team members or other people, and when is it appropriate to hold back your genuine feedback and look for the right time and right place to give that feedback. In India, as I grew up, there is a wonderful proverb which says, the truth has only meaning when somebody is looking for it. If somebody is not looking for your genuine feedback, if you give that feedback, they will look at it like a criticism, only negativity, or you just don't like me. So in a negative context, authenticity and genuineness is not appreciated as much. But if you can create a context, if you were to say, I see that you have done 1, 2, 3 very, very well, and there are a couple of things if you do, you could even take it to a whole new level. If you have interest in it, I have identified a couple of suggestions for you. Let me know when you want to implement, I will give it to you. So what you have done in that minute 1-minute coaching is you have created a context for other people to ask for the feedback and recognize that you have given a positive, appreciative stance to your feedback already, and you have created a gap for them to really look at how do I transcend that gap. Because they are intentional, because they are asking for it, they will receive your genuine feedback much more appreciatively, and they become friends and stay friends. So that is what I think is the way in which authenticity is not always good. You have to watch for it. That's why I call wisdom is not about staying on one end or other end. It is not right or wrong, good or bad. How do you balance it in a way that is appropriate to the context and still being true to yourself? Any other questions, comments? Then shall I move on with a couple more examples, and then I can take more questions. You can prepare for that if you like. Here is a gentleman, Alan Mulally, I had a good chance to interact with in Boeing and later in Ford. He comes out of aeronautical background. At one time he wanted to be an astronaut, and unfortunately because he has some eye issue, he could not become an astronaut. He was very disappointed, but then he said, let me at least make the planes. So he joined from Kansas, he came to Seattle, he joined Boeing, he became the president of Boeing Commercial Aircraft. Somewhere down the line, he was invited to Ford, and that was 2006 time period. And then when the financial malaise hit the nation, most of the companies took the bailout, government bailout. Instead, Ford went ahead and under the guidance of Alan Mulally, took about $24 billion loan. They actually had to get that moniker mortgaged, that Ford moniker. Everybody looked at it and said, isn't it stupid for you to not take the easy money? Not only that, there are so many other actions which it took. Everybody questioned, we should have never brought a person from outside the automobile industry. What are some of those actions? He went ahead and sold away the most expensive profitable Ford businesses like Land Rover and Jaguar. He sold them to Indian Tata Group. And the Ford was making a lot of money making trucks and SUVs. He said, you know, we need to start focusing on small cars. Ford said, we don't make money on it. Then he said, you better figure out how to make money on the small cars because that is the future. Then he found out the what you call Ford Taurus, which used to be a famous car. They shut down that brand because they said nobody is buying it. He said, well, if you have already built a brand value, figure out how to come up with something and make that brand value to pay for itself instead of trying to build a new brand. So in more ways than one, he was very counterintuitive to what they were doing in and out. But now 5 years later, Ford is much more green, much more profitable, and it is on a path to success that was unprecedented, and even when compared to the competitors, they have done exceedingly well. So in that respect, I believe certain ways in which Alan Mulally had taken decisions, taken actions, and how he communicated are some things that increase the value of not only the Ford brand, but also his own brand. And some of you might want to check out Alan Mulally videos. There are and Alan Mulally, some of the articles about it. He is extremely positive. You know, when I went to interview him, he knew more about me, and he was really preparing various stuff for me rather than for himself. Then when I came out, actually it was in Boeing, I asked his secretary, is Alan always like that? He said, yeah. He's always the cheerleader. For anything he takes on, he is positive, appreciative, gung-ho, and 100% into it. Interesting. But those are some things which we don't know how to deal with sometimes in different cultures. You need to think about what is your authentic style and what is appropriate style. How do you really make it work in whichever group, whichever company you are in? Let's look at the context sensitivity and discernment for a minute. Sam Palmisano, when he took over IBM in 2002, he saw the writing on the wall. PCs are becoming commodities. You know, hardware is not where the energy is. So what did he do? He sold the entire PC business to Lenovo. He sold the hard disks to Hitachi. He got rid of even the chips manufacturing. He completely converted IBM into services business. Few years later, Leo Apotheker from SAP took over HP. He tried to do the same thing. He wanted to get rid of the HP, what you might call the hardware business. Even though they bought the Palm for $1 billion a year ago, within a month of introducing the Palm tablet, he closed it down. Of course, they closed him down before he had a chance to do more what he called damage to HP. What was smart at one time was no longer wise by the time it came to Apotheker. That means you cannot just blindly follow successful people, even though they may be your bosses, they may be your seniors or somewhere else. You have to pay attention to what is appropriate and use discernment and judgment to make it work. In India, when I studied, there was a gentleman. This gentleman called Dr. V, for a short way to think about, he created, after he retired as an eye surgeon at the age of 58, he said, I'm too young to retire. I want to make a contribution to the world. So he converted his family house into a 11-bed hospital, and he convinced everybody he knew in his family and his friends to become either eye doctors or to provide medicine supplies or to create an organization or to create training. As of last year, Arvind Eye Care is the largest eye care system in the world, operating at 1/10 the costs of United Kingdom. They provide more services than the entire United Kingdom provides. Just to give a comparison, they got license for the cataract lenses. They got the patent from United States. They got the license from United States. Same cataract lenses are being sold for $150 in United States. In India, they offer it for $2. I was told it has come down to $1 now. And for every one paid surgery, they do two free surgeries. Check out this book, Infinite Vision. And it is written by Bay Area. One of the authors actually lives in Bay Area. So when you have a larger purpose, when you have a noble purpose, your smartness can actually serve a larger community. So each of you being extraordinarily smart, you might want to think about and say, where am I contributing? What is my North Star? What is my noble purpose? Where do I want to be 10 years from now, 20 years from now? It is good to do 10x contribution at this moment, but 10 years from now or 20 years from now, what would you like to say to your children, and for some of you, later than that, maybe to your grandchildren? What have you contributed to the planet? If you can begin to think about it, then your performance, whatever you do today, tomorrow, it will come with a purpose. That is what Indra Nooyi did in PepsiCo. Not only they are looking at making the drinks, Coca-Cola drinks and pizza and all of them, doing food, what you call a fun food. It's okay. They said, we want to get more profit from good for you foods, not just fun for you foods. Because of that, they went ahead and said, we buy Quaker oats for oatmeal. We want to create more kinds of healthy food. Of course, their own stockholders don't like it. So she's actually fighting sometimes for her own position, because everybody wants you to make money right now, but they don't care about anything, where it goes and how it happens. So at some level, you need to look at it and say, how do you reconcile your long-term vision with your short-term delivery? That is where the wisdom comes. You cannot just say, I will only focus on the vision, or you cannot just say, I will only focus on the quarterly results or what I need to do. The wisdom is to be able to balance both of them and align your head and the heart and the hands. When you bring that alignment, the wisdom is something that actually naturally emerges in all of it. So again, Steve Jobs and Ron Johnson created the Apple stores, but as you know, he tried to take it to J.C. Penney and tried to apply the same recipes of no sales, focusing on marketing and creating stores within stores. Again, he got booted out because what worked for Apple didn't work for J.C. Penney. So you need to have, again, three things which I said about personal leadership. Am I having a discernment and right judgment to use what needs to be used where and when? I can't use what made me successful in Apple stores in J.C. Penney. Do you remember I used the word core incompetence? You need to ask yourself, whatever got you this job, for you to go beyond it, you have to see where is your foot nailed to the floor. Most chances are your foot is nailed to what got you the success the last time. Think about your success formula. Think about your winning formula and see what you need to learn beyond that. And here is another lady who is considered to be one of the richest entrepreneurs in India, Kiran Majumdar-Shah. She has a company called Biocon, and she focused on oral insulin. When it didn't work out, she realized her focus is on actually diabetes therapy. She cannot become very anal about one of the product and lose focus on the big picture. So last thing which I'll say is Ratan Tata, the guy who bought the Jaguar and Land Rover, he also realized it is not just the most expensive cars that he needs to sell, but being in India, he wants to make automobiles affordable to everybody, so he came up with a car which costs only $2,000. Right now it has become even cheaper because a dollar is 62 rupees right now, so that means for a $2,000 he could do. Marketing didn't work out very well because he called it a poor man's automobile. So not even poor man wants to buy it because they want to buy a rich person's automobile. They don't want to buy a poor man's automobile. So marketing kind of messed up a little bit, but I have a feeling the concept really caught on, and there are many other companies are beginning to make it. This is an example of enlightened self-interest. You have everything what you have, but question is, how do you support other people? So in my book I talk about any of this, but right at this time I would love to take questions. Yeah, please.
Maybe you touched upon it a little bit, but if you can expand in more detail about the barriers from going from smart to wise, especially in the context of you have a vision, you're looking at the bigger picture, you're looking at beyond self-interest and more for community or for your company or your family. Of course, the people who are around you that are that should be supporting you are the biggest barriers, and how do you overcome these ones?
Okay.
Thank you.
One is action orientation. Smartness is about thinking, wisdom is about doing. Wisdom is always here and now. Smartness is always about the future you are creating. So you need to realize that the wisdom will not come by reading our book, but if you can, let us say some of you, because you got the book as you came in, let us say you create a small book club. Start talking about every week one chapter or one part of a chapter and see how you can apply it in your immediate work or in your family outside. Try to share those things. You can even create a Google Hangout. You can create some other ways of sharing it. Begin to apply one step at a time. If you can do that, chances are, 90 days from now, you would be much wiser. But you see, saying that is much easier. I'm sure you have 100 reasons why you don't have time, you don't have enough people, it takes energy, you have too many things on your plate to be able to organize any of this stuff. So what it means is, one is cognitive framing. Don't look at wisdom as something away from what you are doing. As a matter of fact, whatever is written in the book or what I'm talking about is about application of what you are doing in a smarter, in a wiser way. Right now, right here. So wisdom is not just about long term. So that is one thing which you need to let go. That means focus on applying it. Second, do it with other people. Because wisdom grows when you have multiple questions and when people challenge you. It is not about showing off how smart you are in the group, but asking questions so that all of you can learn. Wisdom multiplies and synergizes. So that is something which is hard for people to look at. Third one I found is a barrier is several times we look at it is outside what I am supposed to do. I will do this, and if I have time, I will read the book. If I have time, I will apply it. Without recognizing whatever you have to make it more executable, more successful, you need wisdom. Because like as you saw Larry doing, it is not about adding more projects that makes Google successful. It is about removing certain things which are not having a high impact and focusing on a smaller number of them with the discernment and making them deeper, more profound, more meaningful, and more higher quality. For that, you need discernment. So similarly, if you can begin to recognize acting with wisdom, you have everything what it takes. It is just that you need to put it in practice. Acting with smartness, you may need more knowledge, you may need to read more, or you may need to actually talk more or do something else. These are three major barriers I have seen. Many smart people, despite having the resources, time or cognitive framing or third application, these are some things which you need to pay attention to.
So I'm just wondering how you applied all these concepts in your own life and like significant parts of your own life where you decided, okay, this is more wise to do?
Okay. Well, my daughter says, I remember when she was in school, I traveled so much that one day I came in and she was going to school, and I was reading paper early morning and she was busy getting ready, and then my wife was there and we were talking, and then my wife was giving me update on what happened during the week that I was gone. I was saying and then continuing with the newspaper. My daughter comes in and says to me, "Why do you keep saying while you are reading newspaper, as if somebody is listening to you reading it?" Then I put my best caring, patronizing tones. I said, "Sweetheart, your mother is giving me an update. I'm acknowledging her. It is not polite to listen without acknowledging." She said, "Dad, you talk about communication. My mother has gone to bathroom 5 minutes ago. Now I know how much you are listening." What I learned was that more you talk about wisdom, the lack of it shows up a lot more clearly to other people. But what I'm learning is places where nobody is paying attention to me, places where I am not in front of other people, that is where actually I have an opportunity to contribute and learn and grow. So I'm paying a lot more attention to learning from home and paying attention to areas where I can make a contribution just because I want to learn and I want to practice. So I should also say, after my colleague and myself, we finished the book, I have learned a lot more about wisdom. I am ready to do 2.0 for the book already, because some of these are all based on practical stuff. But I'm also learning which of these are easier for me to practice, which of these are a little harder to practice. So that is how I'm beginning to make a move myself to take what I have written and apply it in my own life. And it is working. That is one thing. Most of the time I used to say, what you write is for others, what you learn is for yourself. But I'm actually figuring out that some of what we have learned from others, I can apply it for myself. So this book is as good for my own learning as it is for other people.
Okay, so with that, I think we're almost out of time. So once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Kaipa for coming and talking to us. And if you have any more questions or would like your book signed, I believe he has some more time to sign your copies of the book. So if we could all thank him.
Thank you. Thank you, please.